So I'm going to be talking about play and children's mental health today. Just to kind of give a bit of context before we start, until a couple of years ago, all of my work was about children's mental health. I was interested in why children develop mental health problems, particularly anxiety, and thinking about risk factors and how we can support families in particular to try and prevent children from getting mental health problems. Lots of that work took a kind of CBT type perspective, and I still work now on kind of prevention trials using CBT approaches. But I kind of felt a little bit of a mismatch between what we were doing in terms of saying to these families, your child's at risk, so come along and do these 8 sessions of CBT, and actually what the children and families wanted and what felt instinctively what children should be doing and needed to be doing, and kind of going away and doing homework exercises didn't feel quite right. And since becoming a parent myself, I'd been really interested in children's play and how I managed to do a 4-year psychology undergraduate degree and a PhD without anybody ever teaching me anything about play. And then I became a parent and was like, well, that's all they do. They do it all the time. So why on earth are we not thinking about it? So these things kind of came together, and I thought, I want to do some work on play and mental health. And let's think about, instead of getting children who are maybe at risk for mental health problems in to do CBT with us, how about we try and create really great playful environments where they can thrive and they don't have a need to CBT? Right, I mean, it's a bit utopian, obviously, but that was the motivation. So I applied for a UKRI Future Leaders Fellowship, which I'm very, very grateful to have got, and we're 3 years into that now. So I want to kind of talk today about where I think we're at in terms of understanding children's play and mental health. And this talk is a little bit different to usual. I wrote it yesterday, and I returned from holiday at 5 o'clock on Tuesday. So I've written it from this kind of, I've been on holiday for 3 weeks perspective, which is quite different to my normal perspective, I think. So hopefully it will be interesting and not disappointing, and not feel like the ramblings of somebody that's just been driving around Europe for 3 weeks. Okay, so to start, I wanted to just give some context in terms of play in Britain, children growing up in Britain. So just before the pandemic, we conducted a national survey of play in British children. So it's parent report, but it's a large nationally representative sample where we ask parents about where children play, how long they spend playing in different places, how adventurously they play. We ask about mental health. So lots of the findings I'll talk about today come from that big survey. And we're hoping that in 5 years' time, we'll be able to do that survey again and try to kind of start to provide longitudinal data showing how play might be changing in children growing up in Britain. So we found from that work that on average, children in Britain spend around 3 hours a day playing. There's massive variation in that. But if you think about, for those of you who are parents or have spent time with children, when they get up in the morning, they might do a bit of play before they eat their breakfast. They might play whilst they're eating their breakfast. They might be playing whilst they're putting their school clothes on. They might play as they walk to school if they live somewhere where they can do that. And they might play for a while after school, after dinner. So overall, it adds up to about 3 hours a day, outside of school, I should say. Doesn't include time playing in school. And at the bottom there, you've got where they play, going from the most common on the left to the least common on the right. So the most common place for children to play, unsurprisingly, is at home, and then in the garden or area immediately outside the home, then in public playgrounds, in green space, and then less so on their sort of street or local neighbourhoods in sort of indoor play centres or near water. So some of you will know that I'm particularly interested in adventurous play or risky play. For me, there isn't any difference in adventurous play and risky play. I started to use the word adventurous instead of risky when a parent told me they thought risky play meant playing near a hot chip pan or running around with knives. And so I didn't want to be going out and saying, oh, children need more risky play, and then parents sending their kids out running around with knives. So adventurous seems to somehow make a bit more sense, but it's still not perfect. I think parents still have some difficulty understanding what that means. But I think it means child-led play, where children experience subjective feelings of excitement, thrill, and fear. And often that happens when they're taking some risks. We say age-appropriate risk-taking because we're not talking about things where the risk of injury is really high, but things where they might be pushing their comfort zone a little bit, where it feels a bit exciting, a bit thrilling. And in 2021, I published this conceptual model together with Kate Lester, where we drew on our research looking at risk factors for children's anxiety to talk about how adventurous play might offer learning opportunities to prevent anxiety. I'm not going to talk about that in detail today, but I did just want to kind of summarise it briefly just to give some context to why I think adventurous play might be important for prevention of children's mental health problems. So we say in that paper that play provides a positive opportunity for exposure to fear, and as a result, vital learning opportunities about feelings of uncertainty and decision-making under uncertainty, physiological arousal when your heart's racing, your palms are getting sweaty, you feel butterflies in your stomach, and coping. So how do I cope when I feel like that, when I feel those feelings in my body? What's coping feel like? What does good coping feel like and bad coping feel like? And what we're arguing is that children can only learn about managing uncertainty and about coping and about physiological arousal if they have opportunity to experience it. And we want children to be able to experience it when they're having fun and playing before they experience it when they're having a tough time because something bad is happening or they're walking into their exams or whatever it might be. It's really important that this is child-led because children will naturally expose themselves to levels of fear that are appropriate for them. So it's not about an adult forcing a child to do something that they think might be an adventure. I once saw a little boy who was about 2 being pushed up a climbing wall by a parent that obviously wanted their child to go to the top, and the boy was crying and saying, "No, I don't want to. And the parent was physically pushing the child up the wall. That's not adventurous play, just in case that's not clear. So in the British Children's Play Survey, we also asked about where children play adventurously. And again, from the left to the right, we've got the place that they play most adventurously to the place they play least adventurously. And you'll notice this is almost a flip of the first one. So the places children play the most at home are the least adventurous. And unsurprisingly, green space, which is quite a broad category, so it's kind of woodland, grass, any kind of sort of natural space, except for water, is the most common place for children. So it's the most adventurous place where children play. So those links between play and nature facilitating risk and adventure, or the nice pictures of children climbing trees, this work kind of aligns with those ideas. So is there a problem here that needs to be fixed? Like, are children in Britain having a fantastic play experience? They're playing for 3 hours a day. Is that enough? But like, what do we know? Do we need to be concerned? Do we need to be doing anything? Have we just measured it and gone, great, everything's good, let's continue as we are? Or do we need to be thinking about change? This is really tricky because we haven't ever conducted large-scale studies over time in the UK on children's play. Okay, which is why we wanted to do this survey and why we want to keep doing a similar survey into the future, so we can see, are children's play experiences changing? How are they changing over time? But there is some reasonably convincing evidence that play experiences for children have changed quite dramatically over the last generation or two. In the British Children's Play Survey, we asked parents what age they went out on their own, and the average was just before age 9. And we asked what age will your child be allowed out by themselves, or are they allowed out if they already are? And parents told us on average almost 11. So within that generation, accepting that that's not the world's best data because parents had to retrospectively report, but that's all we've got. Within that generation, there's 2 years when children could be going out and playing by themselves, hanging out with their friends, having their adventures, that they're not. They're reliant on their parents to take them places and supervise their play. Who remembers being a kid? Happiest play memories, almost always, are with friends doing stuff you shouldn't be doing without any parents looking. So they're missing out on that. They're not allowed to do it until they're almost 11. I don't think that that will increase because I think going to secondary school and the independence that requires means that by 11 children have to kind of be allowed out by themselves. But it's almost like we've pushed it as late as we possibly can. After school, this is work from Ed Baines at UCL. The most common place for children to go after school, straight home. And the proportion of children going to play at a friend's house or playing and meeting with friends after school has declined over the past 15 to 20 years. So there is reasonable evidence that childhood looks different. You know, kids aren't playing out with their friends after school. They're not going around to play at friends' houses. They're maybe playing online when they get home. And they're older once they're allowed that independence and they're allowed to go out and play without their parents watching them. So, as I said, it's quite difficult to be confident that play has changed, but there's some evidence that it has. What we do know, and what is measured regularly, is children's mental health. Between 2004 and 2017, there was a 49% increase in emotional disorders in 5 to 15-year-olds in England. Okay? We also know now that having a mental health problem is more strongly associated with negative outcomes than it used to be. So it's not that we're just saying that more kids have a problem. Actually, having a problem is worse than it used to be. And COVID has made that worse. So in July 2020, there'd been a further 50% increase, and we're waiting to see what happens over the next year or two as hopefully we move on from this situation. So it's hard to be confident that play has changed, but it seems like it probably has. We do know that kids' mental health is not okay. Okay, so there is some reason that children's mental health is getting worse, and we need to do something about that. If play has changed, maybe that's related to it. Peter Gray has written quite extensively about the potential links between this decrease in play and increase in mental health. So when we think about mental health problems, risk factors are complicated. Okay? It's not straightforward. It's not that one thing causes a mental health problem, right? This is quite an old model from Vassi and Dad's. I quite like just the way it kind of structures things, which is thinking about everybody. So everybody in this room, every child you meet, has currently a cumulative risk, so the likelihood that they're going to get a mental health problem. That is affected by both protective factors, so good relationships, for example, having a good job, having enough money, and also risk factors, so being exposed to trauma, for example. So bad things happen that make you more likely to have a mental health problem, and then you also carry all the good things that have happened that protect you. And obviously it's not that straightforward, like the absence of protection is a risk, etc. But I think it's nice to think about, because we often research risk factors and we don't often research protective factors as much. So where does play fit? Is absence of play a risk factor? Is play a protective factor maybe? So our model of adventurous play is really thinking about play as being a protective factor. So we can't take away all of the risk factors in children's lives. We'd love to, but we can't. So how do we increase those protective factors as much as possible? So that's where we kind of want to go. We want to work out, is play protective of children's mental health problems? If we can demonstrate that, then maybe we can kind of push the policy agenda a bit more to be supporting children's play. For example, earlier today we talked about in hospital, also thinking about it in schools, and also thinking about play environments and investment in play outside of schools. But trying to kind of work out this relationship between play and children's mental health is a bit like trying to sort out this wiring network. And this picture is often quite how I feel about my research. It's all a bit messy. So my take-home message is that it's difficult to just work on how is play related to mental health difficult. How do you define and measure play? How do we define and measure mental health? Relationships are likely to be bidirectional, they're likely to be transactional. It's not that one thing is going to immediately affect something else. The type of play might be important, the age of the child might be important, etc., etc., etc. It's messy, it's difficult. So I think the best that we can do is look for pieces of the puzzle. I think we have to accept that it's difficult and look for pieces and contribute to finalising that question via pieces of the puzzle. I can't talk about all the pieces today, but I want to talk about two pieces of research that have been published recently. One by some researchers at Pedal. I would have included that even if I wasn't at Pedal, I promise. And they found that peer playability at age 3 predicted lower scores on a measure of mental health problems at age 7. So there's lots of good things about this study, a nice big sample of children from a cohort study, controlled for lots of different things, but it's correlational data, so we can't rule out that other factors influence both. But I think play and mental health research is never going to be perfect, right? So it's a piece of the puzzle, and it does suggest a link between the two. Similarly, we looked at data from the British Children's Play Survey, as well as a sample of parents living in Northern Ireland, who we asked the same questions, analysed them both separately, and we found associations between child mental health and time that children spent playing adventurously and outdoors. So we found associations consistently across both samples. So the more time children spent playing adventurously, the fewer internalising problems children had. And interestingly, those associations were stronger for children growing up in lower income families. which is kind of good news and is kind of what we would expect. So if this is protective, then you should get a stronger effect for children who are likely to be exposed to more of the risk factors. But it's cross-sectional, the effects were small, and it's all questionnaire-based. Okay? So again, it's not perfect, but it's another piece of the puzzle. The best evidence comes from randomised control trials where we try and change play. And we know from research looking at play in hospitals that play reduces stress and negative emotion. So when hospitalised children are given time for free play, their stress decreases. Children admitted to hospital for treatment show lower levels of anxiety and fewer negative emotions when they take part in play intervention. And Kelsey talked really nicely earlier about, and Laura as well, about play research in hospitals and how beneficial that is for children. There's also play research in schools where we try and change school play times. None of this has looked at mental health as an outcome specifically, but we do know that when play times are improved in schools, children return to the classroom happier and they settle faster, their behaviour during playtime improves, and children enjoy playtime more. And in a separate study, they found improvements in self-esteem, conflict sensitivity, and concentration by improving playtimes. So some of the work that my team are doing at the moment is looking at changing play in schools, improving playtimes, and how that affects children's mental health. So we've done all of our baseline assessments. The schools are doing their play intervention at the moment. Next year we'll do the post-tests, and then I'll come back and tell you how good or not it was, depending on what we find. We've done some work looking at what affects opportunities for adventurous play. Most people immediately say parents. It says blaming parents, making bad decisions. But parents, it exists within a system, and parents tell us that all of these things are important as well as their own behaviour. So road safety, community safety, the accessibility of play space, and equipment safety and quality as well. We found that children spend less time playing adventurously when they're female, when they're disabled, when they have a parent who's disabled, when parents work full-time, or when their parents are older. And these are some quotes from parents who told us that their child had a disability. So over a third of parents who said that their child had some kind of disability, which would include a mental health problem, said that that disability affects their child's ability to access adventurous play. So one of the quotes is, "Our son has a developmental age of 12 to 18 months because of his autism. It's robbed him of so much. We'd love for him to do this sort of play." And another one is, "His disability limits what he can do as he only has one hand to grab things with." So I think when we're talking about providing these play opportunities, it's really important that we make sure that all children have access to these kind of protective factors. So where do we go from here? What now? I think this is difficult, but we need to be creative about researching play and children's mental health. We need to support doing rigorous scientific work to try and build the evidence base. Often, I think play has a bad reputation, at least in psychology, as being not very rigorously studied. So we need to keep pushing and saying we can study this in a scientific way. And keep building those pieces of the puzzle, accepting that it is difficult. You're not going to be able to do one study that answers all the questions, but keep kind of chipping away at that. And I think adopting a collaborative kind of open approach, so where we're prioritising doing work that's going to benefit children rather than our own kind of career progression, is really important. And today's been such a fantastic example of that, where everybody's been really open and collaborative and chatty. So yeah, it's fantastic work that Pedal are doing supporting that. And I think it's really important that we all continue to work in that way. Thank you very much for having me as my Twitter and email.
Thank you. We'll open it up to questions now, but I thought I would start. I have a question. I thought it was really interesting what you were saying near the end about risky play being less prevalent in some populations for different kinds of children. And you mentioned that risky play might look different depending on the age of the child. So I just wondered, do you think risky play can also look different for different kinds of children?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. So I think risky play, whether it is risky or not, whether it's thrilling and exciting or not, belongs to the child. So in the same way as You know, one of us might be really excited to go and kind of do a 100-mile trek, you know, living out of our backpack, and someone else might think that's their worst nightmare. You know, any experience is internalised in a child. So what might look risky for one kid might not be for that child. So with the work we've been doing in schools, we've had to develop ways of assessing whether children are doing risky play or not. And we went round and round in circles, and then we were like, we just need to ask the kids. You know, so we are doing observation, but we're trying to kind of triangulate what we see with what the children tell us that they're feeling as well. Does that answer your question? Yeah. So yeah, I think it looks different, but it's about the internal experience rather than how it looks.
Question?
Hi, I'm Bryony from the Langley Foundation. You talked about improving playtime in schools. I'd love to hear a bit more about like what that actually meant.
What that looks like. Yeah, so we're collaborating with other organisations that do that work anyway. So rather than trying to kind of reinvent our own sort of programme, which I think academics quite often like to do, we've realised that other people are doing brilliant work in schools, so they're delivering the programme. So one of the organisation we're working with the schools at the moment is Opal, Outdoor Play and Learning. And their programme takes about 18 months. It's kind of whole school change stuff. So they try and get policy changed and kind of approved by governors and things like that. They change the approach to risk assessment. They introduce lots of recycled materials, loose parts, open-ended things that children can play with. So rather than, it's definitely not about building a new climbing frame, right? It's about there being kind of pallets and crates and balls and sheets and that children can turn into whatever they want to turn it into. So one day it might be a den, and the next day it's a fort, and the next day it's a racetrack.